Spring Ridge Road was the kind of suburban street where nothing ever seemed to happen. Neat lawns stretched between white picket fences, and the air was filled with the hum of sprinklers and the chatter of neighbors. It was here, in a modest two-story home, that Michael Warren, 42, lived with his wife Laura. Michael, a quiet and reliable insurance adjuster, embodied the stability of the neighborhood, while Laura, a pharmaceutical sales representative, often traveled for work. To most who knew them, the Warrens seemed like the picture-perfect couple. Every summer, their twin nieces, Anna and Lila Harrington, visited from upstate New York. Anna and Lila were inseparable, their bond as twins evident in their shared mannerisms and private jokes. At 18, they were lively and precocious, exuding the kind of youthful confidence that commanded attention. Their annual visits became a cherished tradition for the Warrens, and the twins brought a spark to the otherwise routine life on Spring Ridge Road. But beneath the surface of family camaraderie, tension simmered. As the twins grew older, their visits began to take on a different tone. Michael found himself drawn to their vibrancy, their teasing remarks, and their ability to pull him out of his mundane existence. He couldn't articulate it, but the twins' presence filled a void he didn't know he had. The girls, in turn, seemed to enjoy Michael's attention, often walking the line between familial affection and subtle provocation. Laura, busy with her demanding career, was oblivious at first. Her focus on work left her blind to the subtle shifts in her household. She trusted Michael implicitly, and the twins were family. But as the summer weeks turned into a pattern of whispered conversations and unexplained laughter, Laura began to notice a change in her husband. He seemed distracted, his behavior more erratic, his gaze lingering too long on things unseen. The last summer they spent together marked the turning point. Anna and Lila, now in college, began visiting unannounced. Their presence in the Warren household became more frequent, and Laura's unease grew. Despite her suspicions, she dismissed the warning signs, chalking them up to her own imagination. But the unease gnawed at her, leaving a trail of doubt that would culminate in tragedy. The quiet charm of Spring Ridge Road would soon be shattered by a crime so gruesome and perplexing that it would turn the idyllic suburb into a national headline. As summer stretched into late August, the dynamics in the Warren household grew increasingly fraught. Anna and Lila's visits became almost ritualistic, often coinciding with Laura's business trips. They arrived with casual familiarity, their presence as much a part of the house as the ticking clock in the living room. Michael, once a model of restraint and predictability, seemed to undergo a transformation in their presence. His laughter was louder, his temper quicker, his demeanor increasingly volatile. Neighbors began to notice the subtle shifts. Michael, who once spent his weekends tending to the lawn, now seemed distracted. His interactions with the twins carried an air of intimacy that, while not overtly inappropriate, left onlookers unsettled. Whispers began to circulate, but in a town like this, where gossip was currency, no one voiced their concerns outright. Laura's growing suspicions were fueled by a series of small, seemingly innocuous discoveries. A forgotten scarf, the scent of unfamiliar perfume on the sheets, receipts for dinner she hadn't attended. These fragments of evidence coalesced into a narrative she didn't want to confront. Convinced that Michael was having an affair, she began piecing together the puzzle in secret, her mind racing with possibilities. The twins, for their part, seemed to revel in the undercurrent of tension. Their behavior, once endearing, took on a more calculated edge. They whispered in corners, exchanged knowing glances, and acted with a brazenness that suggested they were fully aware of the storm brewing around them. To Michael, their games were intoxicating, an escape from the monotony of his life. But to Laura, they were a threat, a fissure that could split her marriage wide open. The breaking point came one fateful afternoon in early September. Laura, returning from a canceled business trip, pulled into the driveway earlier than expected. The house was quiet, the air heavy with a stillness that set her on edge. She entered cautiously, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, In the master bedroom, she found Michael, his face flushed, his expression caught between guilt and defiance. Behind him, Anna and Leila stood frozen, their postures stiff with shock. Laura's mind reeled as she tried to process the scene, but before she could react, the silence was shattered by a scream. Minutes later, neighbors called the police to report a commotion at the Warren house. By the time they arrived, the living room was a tableau of horror. Anna and Lila lay lifeless, their bodies crumpled on the rug, crimson streaks marring their pale skin. Michael stood over them, a knife in his trembling hand, his face a mask of anguish. Laura, in the throes of hysteria, lunged at him, wresting the knife from his grasp. The scuffle ended in a single, decisive moment. When the police entered, Michael lay on the floor, his body still, the knife buried in his chest. Laura knelt beside him, her hands stained with blood, her expression a mix of terror and fury. The quiet charm of Spring Ridge Road had been irrevocably shattered, leaving behind a scene that would haunt the town for years to come. The crime scene on Spring Ridge Road was a portrait of chaos. Flashes from police cameras illuminated the once pristine living room, casting eerie shadows on the blood-smeared walls. Detectives combed through the house, collecting evidence while trying to piece together the sequence of events that led to such a shocking tragedy. The victims, Anna and Lila Harrington, lay side by side, their identical features now marked by violence. Michael Warren's body, slumped on the floor nearby, completed the grim tableau. Detective Thomas Miller was assigned to the case, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for meticulous attention to detail. Miller had seen his share of horrific crimes, but this one stood out. The juxtaposition of suburban normalcy with the grotesque nature of the deaths unnerved even him. As he surveyed the scene, he noted the unusual positioning of the bodies, the blood patterns, and the lack of defensive wounds on the twins. Something about the scene felt off-staged, almost deliberate. The initial interviews provided few answers. Laura Warren, sitting in the back of a squad car, was still in a state of shock. Her statements were disjointed, her account of events fragmented. She claimed to have come home unexpectedly, finding her husband with the twins in what she described as a compromising situation. The details beyond that were murky. She remembered the knife in Michael's hand, the sight of blood, and an overwhelming sense of rage. The rest, she insisted, was a blur. Neighbors painted a complex picture of the Warrens and their nieces. While most described Michael as quiet and unassuming, a few admitted they had noticed odd interactions between him and the twins. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Clara Foster, recounted seeing the girls arrive frequently while Laura was away. Another neighbor, Mark Dempsey, mentioned hearing raised voices and the sound of breaking glass on the day of the murders. As the evidence was cataloged, a disturbing narrative began to emerge. Forensic analysis revealed that the twins had been dead for hours before the police arrived. Their injuries were consistent with sharp force trauma, but the blood patterns suggested they were killed where they were found, indicating no attempt to move or hide the bodies. The knife used in the crime bore Michael's fingerprints, but curiously, so did a second knife found in the kitchen sink, its blade wiped clean. Detective Miller's investigation soon uncovered secrets that unraveled the facade of the Warrens' idyllic life. Financial records showed that Michael had been withdrawing large sums of money in the months leading up to the murders. A closer look at his phone revealed a series of text messages exchanged with Anna and Lila, their tone suggestive and conspiratorial. The correspondence painted a disturbing picture of manipulation and blurred boundaries between uncle and nieces. Laura Warren, meanwhile, became the focus of intense scrutiny. Her claim of self-defense was complicated by the evidence. Forensic tests showed traces of Michael's blood on her clothing, consistent with her admission that she had stabbed him during a struggle. However, fibers from the twins' clothing were also found under her fingernails, raising questions about her involvement in their deaths. The autopsy reports added another layer of complexity. Both Anna and Leila had sedatives in their systems, suggesting they were incapacitated before their throats were slashed. Toxicology tests found traces of the same sedative in Michael's bloodstream, though in a much smaller dose. Investigators speculated that he may have been drugged as well, but the timing and dosage left gaps in the timeline. As Miller delved deeper, he uncovered a troubling dynamic between Michael and the twins. Interviews with Anna and Lila's friends hinted at a relationship that had crossed into inappropriate territory. Some described the twins as thrill seekers who enjoyed pushing boundaries, while others suggested they were adept manipulators who exploited Michael's vulnerabilities. Whatever the nature of their bond, it was clear that their connection had spiraled into something dark and destructive. The pressure on Laura mounted as prosecutors began building a case against her. They argued that her discovery of the affair, combined with jealousy and betrayal, drove her to kill Anna and Lila in a fit of rage before turning on her husband. Her defense team countered that she acted out of temporary insanity, her actions driven by the traumatic scene she encountered upon arriving home. The case captivated the media, turning the once quiet neighborhood into a circus of reporters and onlookers. Headlines blared sensational theories, from the aunt's revenge to the twins' deadly game. The public was divided, with some sympathizing with Laura as a victim of unimaginable betrayal, while others saw her as the architect of a calculated crime. As the trial loomed, Miller was left grappling with unanswered questions. What role had Michael truly played in the deaths of his nieces? Was Laura's account of self-defense credible, or was it a convenient alibi? And why had the twins, who seemed to hold so much power in their interactions, ended up as victims in a tragedy of their own making? The deeper Miller dug, the more he realized that the truth behind the events on Spring Ridge Road was as elusive as it was horrifying. The courtroom was packed as the trial of Laura Warren began, a spectacle that drew nationwide attention. Reporters jostled for space outside the courthouse, their cameras trained on the woman at the center of the case. Laura, dressed in muted tones, sat expressionless beside her defense attorney, her once vibrant demeanor replaced by a hollow detachment. The prosecution painted her as a woman consumed by jealousy and rage, while her defense team argued she was a victim of trauma and temporary insanity. Prosecutors laid out their case with meticulous detail. They presented evidence suggesting that Laura's actions were premeditated. The clean second knife, they argued, pointed to an attempt to conceal her involvement in the twins' deaths. They highlighted the financial strain in the Warrens' marriage, implying that Laura's growing resentment over Michael's alleged affair with Anna and Lila was the catalyst for her actions. Witness testimonies bolstered the prosecution's narrative. Neighbors recounted hearing arguments and seeing Laura's car in the driveway hours before she claimed to have returned home. One particularly damning piece of evidence came from Michael's co-worker, who testified that Michael had confided in him about Laura's growing hostility toward the twins and her suspicions of infidelity. The defense, led by renowned attorney Rachel Turner, countered with a narrative of betrayal and mental anguish. Turner argued that Laura had stumbled upon a horrific scene and acted out of fear and shock. She pointed to Laura's clean criminal record, her reputation as a devoted wife, and her years of therapy after a difficult childhood as evidence of her character. Turner also highlighted inconsistencies in the timeline of events, questioning whether Michael himself had killed the twins before Laura arrived. The cornerstone of the defense's case was Laura's mental state. A forensic psychiatrist testified that Laura exhibited signs of acute stress disorder, a condition that could impair judgment and lead to impulsive behavior. Her actions, they argued, were not the calculated moves of a murderer, but the desperate acts of a woman pushed to the brink. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Laura took the stand. In a trembling voice, she recounted the events of that fateful day. Her testimony was raw and emotional, painting a picture of a woman shattered by betrayal and horror. She described the sight of Michael standing over the twins, the blood pooling around them, and the overwhelming need to protect herself. Her account was both gripping and ambiguous, leaving the jury to wrestle with questions of guilt and motive. As the trial unfolded, Detective Miller continued his own investigation, driven by a gnawing sense that something was missing. The evidence against Laura was compelling but incomplete. He revisited the scene on Spring Ridge Road, poring over case files and re-examining the physical evidence. Miller's intuition told him that the story was far more complex than it appeared. The toxicology reports were his first breakthrough. While the sedatives found in Anna and Lila's systems were consistent with the dosage found in Michael's blood, the timeline didn't add up. The twins had been drugged hours before their deaths, yet Michael's dose was far smaller and more recent. It suggested a deliberate plan, one in which Michael may have been incapacitated to prevent him from intervening. Miller's attention turned to the twins themselves. Interviews with their friends and acquaintances revealed a pattern of manipulative behavior. Anna and Lila were known for playing dangerous games, testing boundaries, and seeking out forbidden thrills. A former roommate recalled overhearing conversations in which the twins bragged about their ability to control people, describing their uncle as a perfect target. The discovery of a hidden journal among Anna's belongings added another layer of intrigue. The entries hinted at a plan to provoke Laura, though the details were vague. Phrases like "push her buttons" and "watch her crack" suggested that the twins had been deliberately escalating tensions in the household. Miller was struck by the tone, calculated, almost predatory. Meanwhile, the trial took another turn when an anonymous tip led to the discovery of surveillance footage from a nearby gas station. The footage showed Laura's car parked there for nearly an hour on the day of the murders, contradicting the prosecution's timeline. While it didn't exonerate her, it cast doubt on the theory that she had planned the killings in advance. As the trial neared its conclusion, the jury faced an agonizing decision. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, the testimonies conflicting yet persuasive. The courtroom was electric with anticipation as closing arguments were delivered. The prosecution emphasized Laura's jealousy and the suspicious evidence, while the defense implored the jury to consider her trauma and the lack of concrete proof. The jury deliberated for 3 grueling days. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom held its collective breath. Laura Warren was found not guilty on the charges of first-degree murder, the jury citing reasonable doubt and temporary insanity as factors in their decision. Though she was spared a life sentence, Laura was remanded to a psychiatric facility for treatment, a decision that divided public opinion. Some viewed her as a tragic figure, undone by the machinations of her husband and nieces. Others saw her as a cunning manipulator who had escaped justice. For Detective Miller, the case remained an open wound. The unanswered questions haunted him, the loose threads tugging at his sense of closure. Who had truly orchestrated the events of that day, and why had such a seemingly ordinary family descended into darkness? The house on Spring Ridge Road stood empty, a silent monument to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. In its shadows lay the secrets of a family destroyed by obsession, betrayal, and violence, a puzzle that would haunt those involved long after the headlines had faded. Spring Ridge Road never returned to its former quiet charm. The Warren home, once filled with laughter and summer traditions, became an uninhabited relic of tragedy. Local teenagers dared one another to approach it at night, whispering about the horrors that had occurred within its walls. The townspeople avoided the house, their unease rooted not only in the crime, but in the unanswered questions that lingered like a heavy fog. Laura Warren's acquittal left the community divided. Some rallied behind her, framing her as a victim of circumstance, a woman pushed beyond her limits by betrayal and deceit. Others vilified her, believing she had manipulated the system to escape justice. Laura, however, was oblivious to the outside world. Confined to a psychiatric facility, she withdrew into herself, haunted by flashes of that fateful day. Her psychiatrist, Dr. Evelyn Hart, worked tirelessly to help Laura confront her trauma. Sessions often started with long silences, broken only by Laura's halting admissions of guilt and confusion. "I don't know who I am anymore," she confessed during one session, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Hart encouraged her to recount the events in detail, but Laura's memories were fragmented, as if her mind had compartmentalized the horror to protect her sanity. Meanwhile, the Harrington family, devastated by the loss of Anna and Leila, left the town in silence. Their departure left an air of unresolved sorrow. They refused to speak to the press or participate in public discussions about the case, choosing instead to mourn privately. Rumors swirled about their intentions to sue Laura for wrongful death, though no such case materialized. Detective Thomas Miller, despite officially closing the case, couldn't let it go. The inconsistencies gnawed at him, particularly the evidence suggesting the twins had a hand in orchestrating their own demise. He spent his evenings revisiting the files, poring over the autopsy reports, and replaying interviews in his mind. Something about the dynamic between the twins and Michael refused to sit right. A breakthrough came when Miller received a call from a retired colleague who had seen a news report on the case. The colleague, intrigued by the mention of sedatives, recalled a similar incident years prior in a neighboring county. The victim in that case had been drugged and later found dead under circumstances that also involved manipulation by a close relative. The connection was tenuous, but it reignited Miller's determination. Miller began to dig into Anna and Lila's past, starting with their time at college. He discovered a pattern of behavior that fit their reputation for recklessness and manipulation. Former professors described them as intelligent but unmotivated, frequently pushing boundaries in ways that unsettled those around them. One classmate recounted an incident where the twins orchestrated a cruel prank on a professor, demonstrating their ability to work in tandem to achieve their goals. A closer look at their social media accounts painted a portrait of two young women who thrived on attention. Their posts were filled with cryptic captions and photos designed to provoke speculation. Miller found particular interest in a post from Anna, dated 2 weeks before their deaths, featuring a close-up of a glass of wine with the caption, "Summer Secrets Unraveling." What happens next? Miller also discovered financial records that showed Anna and Lila had recently opened a joint account with a substantial deposit from an unknown source. The timing coincided with the withdrawals Michael had made in the months leading up to the murders. This suggested the twins had been leveraging something against him. Miller suspected blackmail, though the specifics remained elusive. The journal found among Anna's belongings provided additional clues. One entry in particular stood out, Michael's cracking. "It's easier than we thought. Lila thinks we should push harder, but I'm not sure. What if it all goes wrong?" The entry hinted at their growing control over their uncle and their awareness of the risks involved. Miller's investigation uncovered a web of deceit and manipulation that pointed to a dangerous game spiraling out of control. The twins had been using Michael's affection against him, exploiting his vulnerabilities while carefully masking their intentions. The entries suggested they had become emboldened, escalating their provocations as they sought to test Laura's limits. But Miller's most chilling discovery came when he re-examined the gas station surveillance footage. In the background of one frame, barely visible, was a figure matching Michael's description. He wasn't at home as Laura claimed he had been. He was pacing near her car. The timestamp revealed that Michael had been alive and coherent shortly before the murders. This raised new questions about the timeline. If Michael had been at the gas station, who had killed the twins? And why had he returned home, only to end up dead himself? Miller now believed there was a third layer to the tragedy, a final, unseen player in the deadly game that had unfolded. The answers, he feared, lay not only in the events of that day, but in the deeper, more sinister undercurrents of the Warren family dynamic. The full truth, it seemed, was still waiting to be unearthed. Months after the trial, Detective Thomas Miller's relentless pursuit of answers finally paid off. A forensic accountant hired by the police uncovered a series of payments from Michael Warren to a shadowy intermediary. The intermediary, a local contractor named Daryl Vickers, was known for his under-the-table dealings and a criminal record that included intimidation and assault. Confronted with the evidence, Vickers admitted that Michael had hired him for a peculiar job. to collect incriminating evidence against Laura Warren. Michael suspected Laura had uncovered his relationship with the twins and believed she was building a case to ruin him financially and legally. Vickers claimed he provided Michael with tracking devices and surveillance equipment, but their dealings stopped abruptly 2 weeks before the murders. This revelation reframed the narrative. Michael, it seemed, was trying to shift blame onto Laura in case his secrets came to light. But why had the plan stopped? And how had it led to the bloody scene in the living room? The missing puzzle piece came from Laura herself. During a therapy session with Dr. Evelyn Hart, Laura finally recalled a crucial detail. She admitted she had confronted Michael days before the murders, telling him she suspected his inappropriate relationship with Anna and Lila. According to Laura, Michael had reacted with a volatile mix of guilt and desperation, confessing that the twins were out of control and threatening to expose him unless he paid them more money. Laura's memory continued to unravel as she described her arrival home on the day of the murders. While she maintained that the twins were already dead when she entered, she now remembered seeing Michael arguing with someone, a shadowy figure she couldn't identify. This suggested the possibility of a third party present during the crime. When the police cross-referenced the timeline with Vickers' admissions, a theory began to take shape. Michael, driven to desperation by the twins' manipulation, had lured them to the house under the guise of negotiation. In a moment of escalating tension, the situation had turned violent. Whether Michael killed them intentionally or in a fit of rage was unclear, but his actions had set the stage for tragedy.